Welcome. Today I'm really excited to share with you an underestimated way that you can improve your orchid care, and that is with your pots. So my goal is that you'll be able to see that there are many ways to pot up an orchid and many ways that you can be successful if you take into consideration your orchid's growing space, your care environment, and the type of orchid that you are growing. So let's get started. Repot Me sent me many pots, and I'm really excited to show you what they have. So this first one is a decorative pot. And I'm just going to open it up so we can have an unboxing video. Right here we have this cutout pot right here, and this provides drainage at the bottom. You can see there's drainage right there, and then on the sides it also has cutouts, and this can help your orchid roots to breathe because orchid roots need air and they like air movement, and most orchids really like a nice draining mix. So this pot will provide that. So I would say one of the cons of this type of pot is that the roots can grow out the sides and they can be pretty tricky to untangle when you are repotting your orchid, but I want to show you that there is a workaround for that. So here is another pot from Repot Me. It's very pretty, and inside you can see that there is a plastic pot. So that can help some of the roots stay inside of the pot and help to make repotting a little bit easier. Another advantage to these types of pots is they are very attractive. So if you want something that looks nice and is very pretty, then these pots will do the trick. Another thing about these pots is they are pretty heavy, a nice heft. If you have a orchid that is top heavy, then it won't tip over in a ceramic pot. So that's another thing that's really nice about these. They're beautiful and they're stable, and if you add a plastic pot inside, then it helps to make unpotting easier. Another thing about these ceramic pots is that they don't hold in as much moisture as, say, a plastic pot. So when you do insert a plastic pot inside, then you're getting really the properties of the plastic pot versus this. So when you pot with a plastic pot inside, your orchid is taking on the properties of the plastic pot versus this ceramic pots. Again, Repot Me sent me these plastic pots, and they're kind of like a nesting plastic pot because they sent me all different sizes. So if you are looking for an orchid and you think it's so big, there's no plastic pots out there large enough, then Repot Me has you covered, and it all goes all the way down to these smaller pots right here. That is really nice with Repot Me is they have lots of different sizes, and they are very sturdy, and they have ventilation holes on the side and also drainage on the bottom. So that's very helpful. And another thing that's really nice about plastic pots is that you can see the roots, and you can tell if it needs to be watered based on what color the potting media is and also the roots, the root color. So just to go back to this really quickly, inside of a decorative ceramic pot like this, you cannot see what the roots are like unless it's in a plastic pot that's inside, and then you could pot it inside like this, take it out, and then you could look at the roots that way. Just to give you an example, so this orchid is potted up in a clear plastic, and I can see that it is still wet inside. You can see that there's condensation, so I would wait to water this orchid, right, based on looking at the clear plastic pot. Clear plastic, any type of plastic, will keep the roots wetter longer. So that is something to consider based on the type of orchid that you're growing. Some orchids like their roots to stay slightly wet, like if you're growing, for example, a Phalaenopsis or a Paphiopedilum orchid, they like their roots to stay a little bit wetter. If you're growing another type of orchid, say a cattleya or a dendrobium, then these types of orchids like to dry out in between watering. So then it would be really important to keep that in mind when you use the type of potting mix that you use. And you can kind of customize how wet and for how long the potting mix will stay wet based on your pot and your potting mix. So let's take another example of plastic. So we have this cattleya right here, and this orchid was grown in a greenhouse, and it has a nice free draining. You can see the size of the potting mix. It's about a 1/2 inch, and it has some sponge rock in here, which are large pieces of perlite, and that keeps it really free draining. But yet this dark, opaque plastic pot, I can't see the roots, but if you are a seasoned orchid grower, then you know about how often your orchid needs to be watered. Another thing you can tell is by the heft. How much does it weigh when you pick it up right after it's been watered and then after a few days? So with these cattleyas, they like their roots to dry between watering. But let's look at another type of orchid. So we have slipper orchids. We have a phragmipedium and a paphiopedilum right here. They are both potted in, just like the cattleya, they are both potted in opaque. The plastic pot has a few properties, right? So this means that I can't see the roots. It also means that it's lightweight, and it also means that the roots will stay wet a bit longer. These also have a nice open mix. A lot of people like to pot phragmipediums and paphiopedilums in something that's a little bit more water retentive. So just to customize the care that these orchid needs, that means that they're just watered more frequently, okay? Another type of pot that you can use to water your orchids is a terracotta pot. So you can see that this one is a bit of a beast. It has 3 flower spikes that are growing. Some of the leaves are quite long, but let's just talk about the properties of terracotta. So terracotta, it's stable and it's pretty inexpensive. You can find it at any big box store that sells pots. You're likely to be able to find terracotta. This one has drainages on the bottom, and also right here it has some cutouts here on the side. One thing to know about terracotta is that your orchid roots will stick to terracotta. It will just fuse themselves very tightly to terracotta. Terracotta also will whisk. Terracotta will also wick moisture away from the orchid potting mix. So if this potting mix were to get too dry, the pot would absorb the water maybe even before the roots. So that's something to keep in mind. If you live in a really humid environment and you're trying to figure out how to wick moisture away from your orchid roots, then a terracotta is a really good choice. But you can successfully grow Phalaenopsis in both terracotta and in clear plastic. So like with this one, I can see these aerial roots just fine, but I can see the roots that are down here in this potting mix. So that's something to keep in mind. So if you're a beginner and you're not really comfortable and you'd like to be able to see the roots, then the clear plastic is definitely the way to go. All right, I want to show you a couple other methods of potting orchids and different kinds of pots that you may not have thought of before. This one is called the carousel pot, and it is sold by Repot Me as well. The thing that is really nice about these is that there's no ring around the top here. So if I were to repot this orchid, I just have to lift it up out of the pot so it doesn't damage the roots. So you can see that root right there. I can just pop it up and out, and orchid roots like to wander, and this pot allows them to do that. So it is really open. That allows for a lot of airflow. So with this Phalaenopsis, for example, I would need to add some rock wool or sphagnum moss if I was worried about it drying out too quickly. So that's something to keep in mind with this one, but you can definitely see the roots. This one is a self-watering pot, and it is from Planter Homa. And it is interesting because It uses this capillary method. You can see this has a string that is threaded up through, this rope, I should say, is threaded up through the potting mix, and then those strings are down here, and there's a little water reservoir. So what I found when using this method is to not keep the reservoir full all the time. It needs time to be able to dry out. So I found that it works well with these Phalaenopsis. And here's a Maxarilia tenafolia. It had some light problems, so there's a little bit of damage from the sun on this orchid, but it is a very thirsty orchid, and it does well also in this self-watering pot. And just like with the Phalaenopsis, even though this is a thirsty orchid, it does best if you allow the water reservoir to evaporate completely before watering again, before refilling that water reservoir. Just another example. So I showed you this one before, but I just wanted to show you that these two orchids, I bought them at the same time. They look like they're both doing really well, and they are potted very differently. This one is in the clear plastic pot from Repot Me. This is just a terracotta pot that my kids painted for me, and they're both thriving and doing well. Their leaves look about the same, and the roots are doing about the same. And I just have to keep in mind that Phalaenopsis like their roots to stay barely moist, never soggy, and even though they're potted very differently, if I keep an eye on the potting mix and the roots, then they will both thrive. I hope that this video was helpful for you and that it helped you to see that there's lots of roads to success in potting orchids and choosing the right kind of pot. It's just really important that you keep in mind the needs of the orchid so that you're able to give them what they need based on the type of pot and potting mix that you are offering for your orchid. And if this video resonated with you, if you liked it and you found something helpful in it and you'd like to hear from me again, then subscribe, like, and share this video. And of course, we have a community called Orchid Buds, and it's a place that we get together and we grow orchids and we support each other. We get involved in experiments together. We try new things and we learn together, and it is so much fun, and we all love it. I love it, the members love it, and it's just a fantastic way to really improve your orchid care. And I will leave a link for that in the description, and we'll see you next time.